Hello to everybody. Today, for the Tactics Institute, we will talk about the situation in Mozambique. It is not that common seeing this African country in the news, but Mozambique is now facing an increased activities of Islamist militants in its north province, Cabo Delgado. And we are here with Emilia Columbo. She is a senior associate of the Africa program in the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So good morning to sunny California.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot that you have a little bit of time for us because I know it's a strange situation for all of us, being in lockdowns and so on. It's really an honor having you. And I have to also say that our distinguished guest, prior to her current position, she served as a CIA senior analyst covering African and Latin American political and security issues. So if we are talking about what's going on in Mozambique, the fact is that the conflict in Cabo Delgado is brewing for some time, and now we have seen more than 100,000 people were displaced, and also we are talking about hundreds of casualties. And in February, I had a chance to, just before the global pandemic hit, I had a chance to visit Mozambique, not Cabo Delgado, but I have seen the weaknesses of the government, the kind of a mixture of political instability, also impact of the climate changes, and now also, of course, the terrorism plus COVID-19. So let's talk about what the situation in Cabo Delgado, about the Jihadi movement in Cabo Delgado, and what the presence of militants mean for Mozambique, and maybe also for a broader region. So my first question would be, in general, what do we know about the Islamic insurgents in Mozambique in terms of their structure, maybe processes of radicalization and goals?
Even though this organization has been operating for 3 years or so now, information is still fairly limited about the group. The government has been very diligent about controlling that information that they do have. It's been very difficult for researchers on the ground, I think, and journalists in particular, to gather information. And the group itself has been very conservative in its use of the media. What research has shown is that this group was probably born out of disaffected Muslim youth who had their economic expectations disappointed. These are youth who are exposed to radical Islam from other parts of East Africa. One particular Kenyan cleric often comes up in this research, and they sort of embraced these ideas. We first saw them take up arms in 2017 after a group of their fellows were arrested, and they attacked the police station, the prison where they were, to free them. And since then, the group has evolved. Our most clear information about their goals came from a video they published at the end of March, in which they called for law based on the Quran, for Sharia law in Mozambique, where they rejected the Frelimo government and its flag, and have advocated for fighting for the poor, for fighting for poor Muslims in particular. So it seems like for now, their goals are very much focused on the area where they live and where they emerged.
Mm-hmm. We also have seen in March 2 attacks on 2 ports, important ports in Cabo Delgado. So can we say that basically the insurgency is growing?
Absolutely. Those attacks were a huge shift for this organization that up until then had focused on hit and run attacks on tiny villages, attacks against civilians. The attacks we saw in these 2 areas you mentioned were drastically different. In one instance, they attacked by sea and by land, demonstrating a level of coordination and planning we hadn't seen before. The way they treated the civilians was a huge departure as well. There was some looting, and they attacked a bank, but all the goods that they obtained, they redistributed to the people. They hung out, they conversed, a significant change from what we had seen before. And not to say that they've completely stopped attacking civilians, we certainly still see reports of that too. But at the same time, we see reports of outreach to civilians, of trying to win the hearts and minds of the locals.
So do you think there is a shift of the tactics, maybe a strategy, and why is that so then?
I think there is a shift in tactics and strategy. I think it may speak to an evolution of the organization. They're probably bigger, they're stronger, certainly based on the level of activity we're seeing than they were, say, 3 years ago. And so I think this all feeds into an evolution of their tactics and strategy, as well as their forces grow, as their confidence grows. We see reports of, well, we've been seeing reports of a link potentially to the Islamic State. I would argue these videos are the best evidence of that as well, where you actually see the black flag and hear them echoing many of the sentiments that you hear among other Islamic State affiliates. So maybe there's some learning that's taking place there too that we're now seeing applied in their operations.
So you would say that the reports about the links of the Mozambique Islamic movements to the Islamic states are credible, because, as you said, we have seen some videos, and also ISIS has claimed responsibility for some attacks, for some recent attacks in Mozambique. So is it a credible information that there is at least some kind of a connection between ISIS, right?
Yes, I would agree, especially based on those videos. For the first time, we have seen ISIS claims probably for close to a year now, but we never heard a response from the group itself. And for the first time, we see that response. They are embracing that organization. I think the next question is, what does that mean in practice?
Yeah.
And when we look at other African affiliates of the larger jihadist networks, it often comes down to more of a marketing tool than a practical, tactical relationship. The first thing we see is a shift in propaganda with these organizations after they claim some affiliation. And we certainly saw that borne out here, where they went from no media presence to videos and photographs, and very dramatic ones at that. Then we also, after that, will see some degree of skill sharing. And again, perhaps we're seeing that already taking place as well. But I think it's important to note, as we look at how that relationship between the Mozambicans and the larger network evolves, is that African affiliates will push back against the international organization. They will sometimes go their own way or resist whatever it is the larger directive may be. So I wouldn't say that they control the Mozambique organization. There's still independence there. And I think one thing we've seen in West Africa and the Sahel is that often there's more communication between the various affiliates on the continent than between the affiliates and the broader organization. So it's certainly an important development to closely monitor.
We have mentioned, and you also have mentioned, that Mozambique has own political problems, and some observers are also concerned that the country might even return to some sort of internal conflict. And you also said that the insurgency in Cabo Delgado was somehow, maybe at least partly, born and fueled by grievances of the local people towards the central government. And yes, the central government, and I also talked to some journalists in Mozambique, the central government is often accused of censoring information coming from Cabo Delgado. So from your perspective, how should the government in Maputo react to the developments in Cabo Delgado?
I think they need a much more balanced approach than what they have used up till now. Up till now, the focus of effort has been on repression, on the use of security forces to harass journalists, to keep sort of information contained. Civilians often get caught up in military operations, and that only fuels this cycle of grievances and distrust of the central government in a place that has historically been neglected by the central government. The government certainly needs to continue some security operations based on actionable intelligence that are focused on the insurgents, that are that do the utmost to protect civilians and minimize any sort of collateral damage. But at the same time they're doing that, they need programs that address these underlying economic and social grievances that led us into this place in the first place. Programs that would provide programs to provide greater economic opportunity and training so that the locals can take advantage of some of these new economic opportunities that are coming into the area. Medical facilities. I think now, after 3 years of conflict, you're going to need some sort of community rebuilding, some like peace and conflict type of programs to help society reintegrate. One of the interesting aspects I found about this is that these youth, they rejected their religious leaders, they rejected their political leaders. We saw division within families, within friends, and it's just this deep level of strife that I think will take time to heal.
Yeah, but maybe one aspect is also that last year Cabo Delgado was hit by the cyclone Kenneth, and and I when I've been when I visited Mozambique, I saw area which was hit by cyclone Idai. So I think that the socioeconomic situation is very dire and problematic. So and interestingly, for example, the EU is giving some money to the government, more than 1 million euro to stop the radicalization of youth in Cabo Delgado. Do you think that those programs might also be helpful?
Certainly, I think we've seen in other parts of the continent, in Nigeria in particular, where programs centered on youth to help counter radicalization have been effective. And I think that would be an important aspect to any sort of program in Cabo Delgado as well, to help counter some of the messages that the current organization is broadcasting.
Yeah. And one last thing, maybe a little bit broader view. Do you think that the conflict in the region might spill over into neighboring nations? And it is interesting. It's far away, but it also have a kind of a global dimension due to the presence of energy gas companies. And in fact, they have asked for the protection from the government. There are also some maybe interestingly some shadowy interests. We have seen a report that Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater, has been in touch with Russian private military company Wagner, and it seems the Wagner is in Mozambique for sure. So if we look at those, if you look at the neighboring countries, if you look at those global aspects of the conflict, are we heading towards something which might be bigger, just the insurgency in one region of Mozambique, or do you think it will be possible to contain it?
I think at this time it's still possible to contain it. I think that the ability of this group to spread beyond what we have today will depend on its ability to project power and to develop a message that has a broader appeal throughout the country and perhaps even beyond. I think Tanzania is probably at the greatest risk of any physical spillover just because they have that shared border. I think the group can impact the region more broadly in terms of disrupting both licit and illicit trade and commerce, again, as they're able to project power into ports to control key roads and the like. And I think in terms of messaging, in terms of being an influence to other youth who feel disaffected and who feel that the government has abandoned them, they could appeal to that pocket of population if they can develop a message and communicate it in a way that resonates with those youth. But so far, we see them very much contained along the coast. We've seen, like over the past year, some attempts at moving deeper into the province, but then they kind of return to this area where they have their bastion, their strength. It's interesting to note that historically, this coastal region of Mozambique and Cabo Delgado was the center of Islam in the country, run by a series of local leaders and very much tied to East African Muslim community, the Swahili Islam, centuries ago. And so when they speak of wanting Sharia law and kind of recreate, you almost wonder, are they trying to recreate what they had centuries ago? And if that's the case, then perhaps their focus will stay along this coastal region. But again, as they grow larger, as their confidence grows, their ambitions could grow with it. And again, the ability to project power and to project a message is probably their greatest tools at spreading.
And do you think that also the West, maybe the US, the EU, should pay a little bit more attention to it, or this is, let's put it that way, this is not our problem?
I wouldn't want to say it's not our problem. I do think ultimately the solution is an internal solution. No one, not the United States, not anyone in Europe, not anyone in Southern Africa, can want a resolution more than the leaders in Maputo. They have to want this more than anyone else. And then we just pitch in as best we can to support them in that effort. But they will need that support. So certainly this is an issue that I think certainly the region needs to keep a close eye on, and partners beyond as well.
Thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. And maybe next time, I know that Mozambique, as I said, is not that often in the news, and hopefully there will be some better developments in the region. Thanks a lot.
I look forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.